Hello, everyone. One more comment from my side. I will run this meeting in English. I think it's also easy for you because all of the documents that you will be asked to prepare are anyway in the English, so it makes no sense to translate all these things for you. So within the next 45 minutes, I'm going to talk about the following 5 points. By the way, are we sharing the screen or not?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm sorry, the screen is not shared at the moment.
Okay.
So let's share the screen so you can see the agenda.
Could you see the sign?
Yeah,
Yes.
now it should work.
It works.
Good. So you can see the agenda. There are 5 points we want to focus on today. So I would like to start with the motivation so that it becomes clear why we need data management plans, and that you can see that this is not only some bureaucratic tool from the European Commission, but that they can really help you. Then we will briefly discuss the requirements, specific requirements of Horizon 2020, and I will talk how to fulfill them, so what to write and what are the tools that you can use to fulfill these requirements. And to conclude, I will give some tips for writing DMPs based on my experiences with the DMPs I have seen so far and general recommendations from the community of data management. So let's move to the first part. Why do we need data management plans? It's all about the way we do the research nowadays, because scientists exchange data, services, and computational power. They collaborate in so-called research infrastructures. They do it to solve complex challenges of the society. This can be like DNA sequencing or Earth observation, forecasting tsunami. One of the very well-known examples is the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. The common thing of all these experiments is that without collaboration and sharing the services and data, we wouldn't be able to come up to new results. And this is how we define the eScience. What is typical about the eScience and research infrastructures is that we highly depend on the tools. Without the tools, we would be blind. You can see in the picture on the left-hand side an example of a Sentinel file. Sentinel is a satellite image from the European Space Agency. If we don't have any tools that can process it and do the magic to visualize it, we won't be able to observe what we can see on the right-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can see a glacier in Spitsbergen, and you can see how it's moving and how it's changing. If we don't have this tooling, if we are not able to visualize it, we are not able to make science anymore. And science nowadays requires lots of data and lots of complex processing pipelines. And this leads us to a problem of low reproducibility. There has been several reports showing that we are not best on reproducibility in medicine, economy, computer science, basically every single domain. This is the problem because we don't document well our research workflows. We don't know exactly what were the conditions in which the experiment took place. So one of the examples I'm showing now in these slides is from a vertical cortex analysis, when the researchers analyzed MRI scans, and they analyzed results providing the same data, but rendering them, producing a visualization using a different version of a tool and on a different configuration of a system. They were getting different results for the same input data. This questions whether you're able to compare the results achieved by different research groups. Is it because the methodology was different, or only because the system configuration was different? And that's one of the reasons why we are talking about data management plans. The other one is depicted in the figure that you can see right now. This is the study made in computer science on reproducibility of papers. Researchers analyzed 600 papers from 8 ACM conferences. ACM conferences in computer science are, let's say, one of the best conferences. So out of 600 papers, 500 papers claimed that there is some software that was produced in course of the research. and only 123 software packages were built. It means that the researchers were able to find the code, were able to download the code, and were able to build it, to execute it, not checking whether what was described in the paper and what was produced by the program fits to each other, but simply whether the program runs. But in the majority, in almost 400 cases, in 80% of cases, they were not able either to run the program, or there was no code that they could use. They tried to contact the researchers and ask for the code, but there were several replies from them stating that there is a wrong version of the code, that they will release it soon, that the PhD student was responsible for coding the program, but that it has left. Also, there were constraints related to licenses, that this is only for the commercial use and intellectual property, and of course, no intention to release. So this is not very reproducible. We are not able to check whether what was described in the paper was really implemented. And to address these problems of wrong versions and of losing data, there was a variety of solutions proposed. One of them is open access to scientific publications and data. The other one are data repositories where you can publish the data. Data citation was proposed to provide persistent identifier data sets. And finally, data management plans that we focus on today. So this slide is just to show you that data management plans are not to be considered as something in an isolation. It's just one of the building blocks that you need to have in order to make your research reproducible, citable, easy to find by others. So let's focus now on what is a data management plan. You can find several definitions, but I think the one from the University of Virginia Library is quite simple and quite easy to comprehend. So DMP is a formal document. It outlines what you're going to do during your research, how you handle your data when you're doing the research, and after. So once the project has finished, and who is going to look after the data while you're done with your work. It makes sure that data is safe now and in the future. Of course, we can discuss what future means, if it's 5 years, 10 years, or 100 years. But this is a topic for a completely different webinar. For me, DMP, and I think for you as well, is an awareness tool. It makes you think. It's not just a legal obligation from the EU or another funder, but it makes you think about 4 things. What data you will use and where you get it from. So if you're planning an experiment and you're going to reuse someone else's data, can you access it? Do you have the data? Do you have a place to download it, to store it? Then, if you're going to work with this data, what kind of infrastructure you will need? What kind of tools? Do you have licenses? Are you going to use an open access tools, and are they available? Or you need to buy dedicated software and pay for expensive licenses? What will be the output of your research? Are you going to deliver another data set, a visualization? Where will you share it? These are the questions you have to ask yourself, and this helps you organize yourself better, because this is also part of your proposal. When you're writing a proposal for the research, your methodology has to be safe. You really have to understand what you're doing. If part of your methodology is working with data, processing the data, you have to also understand what is the software and the constraints you have on your methodology. It's just like with the fishing expedition, some people call it for proposal writing. If you know what you're going to catch, what kind of fish you're looking for, you select the right tools, you select the right time of the day, you select the perfect location, and you take the bait with you. And then there is a very good chance you will catch the fish. But if you just go to the next shop, buy a beer, and take your best friend to go fishing with you, you may have a great time, but you will not catch anything. And the same is with methodology and data management plans. If you understand what you want to do, you have to have the right tools to do. Before we jump into specific requirements of Horizon 2020, I would just like to let you know that DMPs are not something that European Commission invented and this is what they forced, but rather it came from other countries. Originally, in the green, you can see Great Britain and United States, and these were the countries that started first with data management planning. In research in Great Britain, there were different research councils requiring data management plans, and there is an institution called Digital Curation Center, DCC, that distilled a common requirements for DMPs across UK. I will provide the link later in the slide. In the US, the National Science Foundation requires a DMP since 4 or 5 years. It's a very short document, 2 pages, submitted before the grant is given to the researcher. Like 1 year ago, it became compulsory. So a grant can be rejected if a DMP is badly written. Currently in Europe, this is usually not the case, but in the US, it's a really strong requirement. And because these 2 prominent countries have it implemented, others started following. So we have a very nice example from the South Africa, where last year there was no infrastructure for data management, no data management plans, and now they are requiring them and supporting them. We've got similar actions pending in Australia. There is no formal requirement in Australia, but there is infrastructure, there are templates, researchers are used to filling out DMPs voluntary, and we have, of course, European Union. Interesting is also that Qatar and Turkey, so other countries, are also joining this movement of having DMPs. Okay, let's focus now on the requirements, specific requirements of Horizon 2020. So just like you heard in the introduction, open access to publication is default. So all the publications have to be provided open access, but this is not the focus of our webinar. The focus for us is data, and data also has to be open from 2017, but just to make sure, it's not about all the data. It's only the data that help you validate scientific publications, and it's provided on a voluntary basis. So you don't have to provide any internal project data, communications, notes. It's only all the data that you might have used as a raw data, intermediate data, something you got from the instruments, maybe interviews, whatever helps in understanding what you produce as a research. So you're the one to select and say what has to be published. Of course, there is an opt-out possibility. It has no impact on the proposal evaluation. There are several reasons you can say you don't want to publish your data, and you can do it at every stage. So it doesn't have to be done before you apply, but it can also be done during the project. And one other way, if you don't want to share something, is you can still take part in the project, still have a DMP, and in the DMP you can write that there is specific data you are not allowed to release. So you don't really have to tick the box saying opt out. You can still opt in, and then in a DMP say that you are not able to share things because of some of the reasons. But in general, I would encourage you to share the data, because there is always a way to find a subset of data that can be helpful to others in some other settings, or there is a way to anonymize the data, or maybe just to publish the metadata. So I would consider opt-out as the last possible option. There is always a possibility to publish something and contribute to the community. And what is important for most of you is that costs related to data management are eligible costs, so you can also claim them. European Commission doesn't require you to follow any specific template, although there is one. It has 6 sections, 31 questions. So in each section, you get some auxiliary questions helping you better understand what you're asked for. And European Commission endorses FAIR principles, meaning that data must be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. These FAIR principles come from the research community. This is something that was identified as a very nice acronym for helping people understand whether they did their data management properly or not. We will focus on meaning of FAIR principles in the second part of the presentation. And the life cycle that researchers have to follow, or participants of the projects, is that DMP has to be updated. It has to be up to date. The first version is deliverable in month 6. And then when any significant change happens, so if you have new data sets, you change your data sources, or there is some partner joining living consortium, or you identified some risks and there's a change in your data management policy, you have to update the data management plan. Of course, you have to do it also for periodic reporting. So if you have a yearly reviews, for each review, you should have an updated data management plan, and one also, of course, at the end of the project. If you need more specific information about DMPs in Horizon 2020, here is a set of links. The first link sends you to the main website of the Horizon 2020, from where you can find additional resources. I would say the 3 other links are the ones that are most useful for you. So guidelines on Horizon 2020 and the template for data management plan. That has a formatting more or less like a project deliverable has. Good, let's now move to the part about filling out the DMPs. So what do you do and how do you create it? There are 2 ways. One of the ways is to use the aforementioned project deliverable template. So you just download it, open it in Word or any other text editor, and answer the questions, fill out it. Or you can use some software tools for filling out DMPs. These 2 tools are DMP Online and DMP Tool. There is also a tool in Germany called DMP Organizer, but it's in a very early stage, so I'm not able to tell how useful it is. DMP Online is well tested in the European setting. It allows you to collaborate with other people writing the DMP, and you can export the results to the PDF. It also provides you guidance. So every time you have a question, you have some links to useful resources or some comments on what is expected. What is wrong with this tool is that it's not best at formatting. So the final report you create doesn't look really interesting. So what usually works best is to go for the sections of a DMP within the tool, use the guidance, but write your answers directly in the text document. This is what I could recommend here. In the next slides, 3-4 slides, I will just simply show you how the tool looks and how you can work with it. So if you go to the DMP Online DCC AC UK, you can select the type of the project you're running. So the first thing I selected is the title of my project, and then I selected a template. As you can see in the bottom of the page, select the funding organization, European Commission, Horizon 2020. Having selected it, I create automatically my own project within the tool, where you can see sections of the DMP, the one you have seen already. So we have like 6: data summary, fair data, allocation of resources, data security, ethical aspects, and other. And you can see you can also have tabs. This is the initial DMP that you're very likely submitting after 6 months, but then you have a detailed DMP and final review DMP. So the tool understands the concept of a living document and brings already some structure to your DMP. If you expand any of these sections, like in this case, fair data, you can see a question on making data findable, some comments from the European Commission, like outline the approach towards the search keyword. And on the right-hand side, you can see the guidance. And in this case, you can see guidance that is provided by the Research Data Alliance, and it sends you to a metadata standards directory. So in this question, you're asked what kind of metadata you're going to collect. If you don't know what the standards are, you can go to the directory, find the suitable standard, and then write it here in the box what you're going to do, or write directly in your Word document. It's up to you. You can export the file. There are some selection criteria. In the right-hand side, you can see an example of how such a DMP looks like after export. It doesn't really look like a project deliverable. You can use it. There is nothing wrong. European Commission will accept it because there are no strong conditions on formatting. It's up to you. You can format it. You can select the font. So you can do everything within the tool if you wish. Okay, let's move now to the part what to put, in fact, into the DMP. This is very likely what interests you most. So these are the 6 sections of the DMP in Horizon 2020. I'm going to focus now on the first one, on the data summary, and on fair data. The other sections, like allocation of resources, deal with the budget. Ethical aspects are similar to what you face during the ethical reviews. So if you are familiar with the ethical aspects, if they happen in your domain, you will know what to write in here. The most challenging is usually the data summary and fair data. And this is what I'm going to address in the rest of the presentation. So you may ask yourself, what is data? And data can be everything. So it can be measurements from instruments, meaning raw data, but it can be images, video, audio. It can be some samples, interviews, slides, questionnaires. It can be Twitter feed. It all depends on your research, on your domain, and how you do your experiments. So even if you are doing software development, you can consider software as data. Of course, it's stretching the semantic meaning of data, but whatever you find useful for understanding your research, whatever underlies the results you publish, can be considered as data. The best way to describe what you have is to have kind of a table in the DMP in which you follow the structure I'm having here with the bullet points. So type, source, volume, and file formats. So if you're able to pick any of the words I have here in the slide and build a sentence, a story, saying, like, for example, we are going to develop models. The models are based on simulations. We will have 2 GB of files, and we are going to use non-proprietary file formats like XML. So if for every data set you have, you're able to provide such a description like here using the type, source, volume, data, and file formats, you're quite on a safe side in describing what you're doing with your data and what your data is and where do you get the data from. An example from a real DMP from the US, actually. This is a sample passage you can do. So every 2 days, we will subsample affinis populations growing under our treatment conditions. We will use a microscope to identify the life stage and sex of the subsampled individuals. We will document the information first in laboratory notebook and then copy the data into an Excel spreadsheet. The Excel spreadsheet will be saved as a comma-separated value CSV file. And again, some people may question if an Excel is the best tool. It's a proprietary tool. Maybe you can use open access tool, but this is always a matter of a practice in a given community. If everyone in your community is using Excel, yes, maybe it's not the best, but you can still say you're using it as long as you state it explicitly. Let's now focus on the FAIR principles. Here is a brief definition of what each principle means. In the bottom of the slide, you can see a link to the original FAIR principles that were a community-driven result of consultation done by the Force 11 working group. So the data is findable when you're able to find it online in a repository using a search engine. It contains metadata that allows you to find what you're looking for. So if I'm able to say, I'm looking for experiments that produced given size of data using netcdf files, for example, in the domain of Earth observation, then I'm able to locate way quicker what I'm looking for if there is such a metadata. If there is no metadata, it's very hard to locate the right experiment. Accessible means that where you access the file is specified. So whether it's an open access or if there's unlimited access, if the license allows people to access it, if the software needed to open the data and interpret the data is provided. Interoperable means that you're following standards from your domain, so that you're using conventions, that you're using terms that others can understand, or if you are providing a mapping to some known conventions, if you had to implement it in a way different than usually. And reusable means that there is a clear license and documentation of how to use it, how to access it. Many people say that the reusable means that it's the sum of the three other rules, that if something is findable, accessible, interoperable, then it's also reusable. And very important comment I have from my side is that there is really no clear distinction between the principles, because, for example, metadata supports all of these principles. So if you're collecting proper metadata and using proper standards, you're actually supporting each of the principles. And I think this may be one of the reasons why you find it sometimes challenging to describe in your DMP what you're doing to support each of the principles. So don't be afraid to write metadata in all of these sections, because this is what it is. Good. And now a small questionnaire. Unfortunately, we don't have a way to interact easily. So maybe I'll be asking the questions in vain and you just answer the questions to yourself. What you see in the picture. You can see in the picture a nice bird. And basically that's all. Some of you may know that this is a magpie. But I would like to know, who took the picture, why that picture was taken, where was the picture taken, maybe something more about the magpie population. Is it a big one, a small one? We don't know it. But if we have metadata, we can learn way more about it. I took this example from the Atlas of Living Australia. This is a repository for citizen science. People take pictures of magpies around Australia and they submit them online, and they provide metadata. So as you can see, you've got some basic information about the identifier for the data set, but you have a map with a visualization where the picture was taken. So in this case, it's somewhere close to Melbourne. You can see the preview of the bird and some metadata. If I focus on the metadata now, I will make it bigger. You can read from it that the observer was Russell Best. That's a human observation. So it's not taken automatically by a installed CCTV. That its license is CC BY, meaning that you can reuse the picture as long as you give credit to the author of the picture. And you can see that there is a tag called female. So we learned that this magpie was actually female. I'm not going to provide more examples of metadata, but if you scroll down in the link provided, you will see also the taxonomy classification, to which family the bird belongs to, and also what are the coordinates of the picture where it was taken and which standard the coordinate follows. Because sometimes you've got the decimal numbers after the comma precision, and sometimes you are using minutes. Both are valid approaches, and you need to know which one is being used. So metadata helps you to understand and interpret data. It provides details about experiment setup and helps you identify and discover new data, because you can easily search for data sets because you find metadata first. If you have to provide metadata for your own research, there are two libraries to look for community standards. The links are provided here. One comes from the DCC in Great Britain, the other one from Research Data Alliance. Of course, most of the standards listed there will overlap. But so far, this is the best community-driven evidence of standards. There are also some specific libraries, for example, in biology and bioinformatics called biosharing. But usually, when you're working in an area where metadata is important, you know about your standards. So you can use whatever is best for your scientific domain. And here, example of a snippet that you can use for the DMP. I will skip it. You can read it afterwards. And I would like to move to the second part of this, is how do you manage your data during research? Because so far we're talking about publishing data, but what if you lose your data and there is nothing to publish? In the slide, you can see the results of a questionnaire made in Austria 2 years ago. And 71% of you keep your data on your work computer, and only some of you make a backup to the USB that you can also lose easily. And this is not the best way to do. And this is also one of the reasons why we are here and talking about data management. So if you lose your data, there will be nothing to share. Data management plans bring the awareness that you have to manage and order your data, organize your data from the very beginning. If you're doing observations and if you lose the data, you're not able to get the samples again. Sometimes recreating can be too expensive. So while you're doing your research, you have to make sure you are using file naming convention, you're giving proper names to folders and files. You have a way to support versioning. So if somebody is overwriting a file and is doing it by accident, it's not lost. Backups. What if your hard drive fails, or if somebody breaks into your office and steals the computer, or if you forget your notebook on the bus? Not everyone should have access to the data during the research. There may be some confidential data. You may want to restrict data only to those who are involved in the project. So if you're using any storage provided by your department or company, maybe only people from your group should see the data and not everyone from your organizational unit. And finally, you have to find out who is responsible for making sure that these rules are in place, because you can write a data management plan, you can talk about all these things, and if there is no policeman in the room who is making sure you're following it, people won't change that. Important difference between data sharing and open data sharing is that when you're sharing the data within your project, when you're doing your work, you can use any collaboration platform you want. It can be OnCloud, it can be Open Science Framework. In some cases, Dropbox and Google Drive are also okay. The data is changing. This is something internal. You just want to make sure the data is not lost. But once it reaches some state, when it's stable, and you want to share it with others, then you can think about repositories like Zenodo, like institutional repositories, open access repositories. Then people can search, find the data, and have a license. So make sure that you understand data sharing in these both ways, sharing internally during the project and sharing it with the outer world. Same applies for backups and preservation. If you're running your project, you want to have backups of your files. So you want to make you want to have a networked file store, cloud solution, whatever, because it's easy to change your data and delete, and you don't want to lose it. But once your project is somehow stable, you're providing outputs, your project is finishing, you're publishing a publication plus data, you want to use a dedicated repository for that purpose. Repositories give promise to keep the data for long term, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It depends on what the domain requires. But there is a difference on making just a backup and preserving. Preservation means more than backup. It means providing license, migrating data if necessary, and so on and so on. So don't confuse backup and preservation. Backup is during the project. Preservation is when the files are published. And this brings us to the point of archiving and preservation. You don't have to select every data to publish. You have to decide what to keep and what not. And there are different criteria. Usually things that cannot be recreated, some sensor data, something that comes from observation, something that can be useful to others. You may produce a data set within your research, and you may use it for one purpose, but it can be useful in a completely different setting. Maybe there is something you have to destroy because of legal obligations. So you have to ask yourself this question and select what would make sense to make it open. There can be also embargo periods, just like with patents. You can say, I will need this data set for 2 or 3 years because I'm still going to do lots of research and publish great papers from it, and I'm not going to release it now. But maybe a repository can keep it, and after 2 or 3 years, grant access to it. Defining for how long is usually something you have to work out together with the repository, and of course, who will pay for it. So if you're depositing into the repository, you may have money. The question is who will pay for it in 5-10 years, and finding the license. So is it going to be an open license or not, and why not? If you're looking for a repository, there are 4 steps to follow. Try to find first a repository that best matches your discipline. If you find one, you're lucky. If not, look for something that your institute, organization, university is offering. Depositing into an institutional repository is okay. If you don't find anything that makes sense to you, you can go to Zenodo. Zenodo is a repository hosted at CERN, and it's funded somehow by European Commission, and it accepts all kinds of submissions. So it can be a default choice for you if there is no other domain-specific repository. To find more information on the repositories, you can go also to ReFreeData. It's a registry of research data repositories, and maybe you can find something useful for you there. In this slide, you can see an example of the web page from the ReFreeData. It has a faceted search, so you can drill down by discipline and by given a topic to find a repository that best suits you. There are also open registries, directory of open access repositories and registry of open access repositories. They have more or less the same coverage. They are created in a different way, and a very nice website, which is called Repository 66, is just a projection of these 2 registries onto a Google Maps, so you can see which one is the closest to you, and maybe this is also a way to find the best one for your needs. If you want to have examples of repositories in Austria, we don't have too many. This is something that we are still working on in Austria, and this is something that has to change. But University of Vienna has one called Fedra, where you can find mostly collections of books and images. And there is one very domain-specific repository from Climate Change Center Austria that is providing real data sets like netcdf files from the research about climate change and from about meteorology. So you can go to these repositories and just to see how it looks like when data gets published, what kinds of information is there, because very likely by the end of your project, you would like to see your data also in a similar repository. And the last important thing is the license. Horizon 2020 guidelines recommend using CC0 or CC BY license. CC0 means that everyone can use it without necessity to cite you, and CC BY says that people have to say that you were the author. There is a tool provided by EUDAT, which helps you to find which one is best for you. You answer a set of questions, and you get advice on the license you're using. Usually a good practice is when you're doing your project and when you have a folder with your data, please put the license file already into it, because at some point you will share the data with someone, send it, and you forget to add the file. So once you're starting your job, please put the license file in a similar way people do it on GitHub. Some of you are for sure familiar with GitHub. It's a good practice to start with a license MD file defining how people can use your repository. Here's an example of a text for a data management plan that comes from the Great Britain. I will skip it, you can read it afterwards. And this brings us to the last points, which are the tips for writing DMPs. So DMPs are different in different scientific domains. So if you take one from biology and then you try to rewrite it for your own needs in social sciences, the granularity, the level of detail will vary. So there is no easy copy-paste, and there are no good or bad answers. So it's all important how you explain what you have done or what you not have done, why it should be done this way, and that's all. So it's hard to say that this practice is bad. Maybe in your research community, this is the way to do it, Maybe it's something that your research community should change, and maybe you will be one of those people who is changing that. But it's important about explaining why. Be careful, because DMP can reveal how solid your research is. Just like I gave it in the example with going fishing. If I look at the DMP and see that you're providing specific version of a software, that you're saying about specific practices, you're naming specific people or organizations, I see that you have a clear idea of what you're going to do during your research. If you're just saying we will stick to the community standards without saying what the community standard is, it's easy to see you have no idea. So to make it more specific, seek advice, consult, and collaborate. At many universities, you have Forschungssupport, which is in English support for the researchers applying for grants. They may know things about data management. Talk to your IT departments, consult your administrators from IT, talk to your peers who also face similar problems. If you discuss these things early on, you can come up with good solutions. When you're answering questions from checklists, like from the template you have from Horizon 2020, on purpose, I haven't presented these questions, please write coherent text. We've made some studies with students, asking them to fill out some of these forms to see how much they can understand what is required from them. And sometimes we're getting answers like yes, no, yes, we will keep it for a long time. But it was not a text that has some flow. So please make sense that DMP can be read and processed by a human. Assign responsibilities and name responsible personnel. This is a point I have already mentioned. So DMP written and forgotten makes no sense. Make sure you can review it. Make sure that there is someone who will raise the hard questions. Why are you not doing backups? Why haven't we still paid for this cloud service? And so on and so on. It's also important to think about DMPs early when you're doing negotiation of your consortium agreement, because there may be some licenses and consent agreements made. And maybe because of these reasons, you are not able to do some kind of research. Or maybe one of the partners is not willing to contribute, to share, to publish in an open way. And this may actually ruin your project. So it's better to find out these problems earlier than later. You also need to plan your budget. The rule of thumb says 5% of a grant will go to the data management, to pay for the storage, for the backups, for depositing data, collecting metadata. Of course, it all depends on your discipline. Okay, so this brings us to the last slide almost. In this presentation, I was trying to convince you that DMPs are not yet another paperwork imposed on you, that DMPs are in fact an awareness tool that help you better plan your project, your budget, and understand what you're doing with your data, not to lose it. The primary goal of DMPs in Horizon 2020 is to make data fair, findable, accessible, interoperable, and traceable. And future work that we are working on, I'm working on, are machine actionable DMPs. So if we are able to automate data management, if we are able to get this information from different stakeholders automatically, send notifications, we could really reduce a lot of work that is now being done by you. If you want to learn more about what we're doing in that direction, you can visit one of the links you can see in the slides. And I would also like you to invite you to the meeting we are having in Vienna. It is organized by Research Data Alliance Europe. And we'll be talking about use case Austria. We'll be talking about problems that people face in Austria regards to data management, data citation, publishing, and what are the requirements, what is RDA advising you, what you can do to deal with it. So we'll have a lineup of international speakers, and you can interact with them and ask your questions as well. Here is the link in the slide. You can register, it's for free, and it's in November 23. Here are some useful resources for you. You can have a look at them. You can find most of the links in the slides. Here's a summary. You can also visit some webinars. There are some documents in German if you prefer. There is a nice book about managing and sharing data, which is published by the UK Data Archive and is available for free. Thank you very much for your patience. And if you have any questions, please ask them now, or you can contact me later. Thank you.
Ja, danke sehr für diesen Vortrag. Wie angekündigt, beginnen wir nun mit einem mündlichen Frage- und Antwortteil. Ich werde noch kurz meinen Bildschirm übertragen, damit Sie auch meine Folie dazu sehen. Es dauert einen Augenblick. Genau. Bitte heben Sie virtuell die Hand. Wir schalten Sie dann live zu und fordern Sie auf, Ihre Frage zu stellen. Wenn Sie zugeschaltet sind, erkennen Sie das daran, dass Ihr Mikrofonsymbol grün leuchtet. Wir haben in der Zwischenzeit mehrere Handzeichen schon bekommen, die haben schon länger die Hand gehoben. Falls Sie die Frage zurückziehen möchten, bitte ich Sie, Ihr Handsymbol jetzt zu löschen oder die Hand wieder zu senken. Für alle anderen werden wir jetzt beginnen, Sie freizuschalten. Genau, die erste Person, das ist Herr Harald Meyer. Sie sind jetzt freigeschaltet und können Ihre Frage stellen.
Ja, das muss ein Irrtum sein. Ich denke, meine Hand war unten.
Okay, kein Problem. Wir werden dann gleich mit der nächsten Person weitermachen, und zwar die Frau Barpuli. Hallo, Frau Barpuli? Wir können Sie derzeit nicht hören. Gut, dann versuchen wir es mit der Frau Windischberger, die nächste, die die Hand gehoben hat.
Na, meine Hand ist auch unten.
Ist auch unten. Wir sehen es anders im System, kein Problem. Wir haben noch viele Hände in der Höhe. Herr Rudolf Heer, der Nächste. Auch nicht. Wir haben eine Frau Astrid Höberts. Bitte Ihre Frage. Auch das scheint nicht zu funktionieren. Ja, schon langsam wird's ein bisschen dünner. Herr Steven Webb.
Hi. My question was, you do a DME plan or DMP for a project, but actually how you're explaining it, it sounds to me like it's actually for individual researchers. So, I guess the DMP could be, well, I don't know, for a whole project, it seems to be pretty vast. I don't know how it's really doable even for a whole project which has got 20 partners in it. How do you see that?
Well, it's your comment is really good. So yes, the DMP is for a project, and it's for discussing internally which data you're going to collect and making sure people can comply. So of course, by the end of the day, it will be single people who will be putting these rules in place. But it's also about defining in your project agreement a risk that you may lose data. It's also about defining that you have somebody in your board who is making sure people try to come up with the rules you have proposed. So if you say that you're going to use own cloud to exchange data, you would like to make sure that they really use own cloud and they are not using Dropbox or sending attachments using email. So you don't have to, again, publish all of the data. So it's about discussing in one of the early calls, what would you like to publish? So from the very beginning, it would be clear to the researchers within the project what kind of data they are going to collect and document well. So this is how I would see it. So it's not that every researcher in the project has to write the DMP. No, it has to be for the whole project. So it doesn't have to be very fine granular, but it has to be specific enough so that it's clear what are the rules internally for you to follow it.
Okay, wir hoffen, dass die Frage beantwortet ist. Wenn nicht, einfach nochmal die Hand heben, bitte. Wir haben den Herrn Manfred Eigner als nächstes mit einer Frage. Bitte sehr.
Do you want to have the question in English or in German? I'm not sure.
In English, please.
Okay, so we opted out during the grant agreement process of the data management plan. We are a CSA, and the reason for opting out was that we said we are not creating research data since we are not a research action. That was accepted, but still we forgot that we had a deliverable, namely the data management plan in our work plan. So now we have opted out, but still this deliverable defined, and we are not sure what to do with this situation now. Maybe you have a recommendation?
That's indeed a very interesting situation. From my own experience of collaborating within the EU projects, I think you should just contact your project officer, and he will just very likely say, okay, you don't have to deliver this deliverable, but you should contact the officer and they will tell you.
Yeah, so that shouldn't be a problem, but still there is this system where to upload the deliverables, which will complain 60 days after the, so, and okay, I got your message. Thanks.
Okay, wir haben Frau Barpoli mit einer Frage. Wir versuchen es nochmal. Okay, wir können Sie auch diesmal nicht hören. Dann versuchen wir es mit Frau Zankel. Hallo, Frau Zankel?
Ich habe meine Hand auch unten.
Okay, auch unten, ein Missverständnis. Nächste Frage, Herr Falahati. Auch jetzt können wir nichts hören. Hallo?
Maybe people are muted. Maybe they just need to click the microphone first to unmute.
Maybe, if this is the case, maybe they could raise the hand again and we will try it in a few seconds. There is another hand from Sandra Karner. Okay.
Hallo, hören
Auch
Sie
das,
mich?
ja.
Hallo? Aha, okay, good. I would be interested in, since you said so, this opting out issue, and it would not be necessarily a precondition, the data management plan for being funded. I'm wondering about the, meanwhile, in the Horizon 2020 proposals even have this section on data management. And what would you do in case of working on a proposal? How would you state in the proposal section on data management that you would opt out? Simply mentioning one of the reasons why you would like to opt out, or what is the recommendation for that? One is a bit insecure if it's a fixed point in the proposal to just say, okay, that's not relevant for us.
No, I think you should, if you look into the guidelines and the paragraph about opt-out, the European Commission provides like 5-6 reasons why you can consider doing opt-out. So I will make a clear reference what is one of these 5 reasons, and then make a connection to your project, explain why this particular reason applies to your project, why it will happen in your project, what is so specific. So if it's a privacy issue, for example, you have to say that you're a medical project and you're analyzing patients' data and you're not able to publish their identity. And this makes a clear connection between the bullet point in the requirements from the European Commission and your project proposal. Of course, you can always name 2 or 3 reasons, but one I think is enough.
Okay.
Okay, dann haben wir die nächste Person mit einer Frage. Herr Zazanis, bitte.
Yeah, thank you. My question is actually if you have any experience of how much effort it means to implement a DMP, not only to write it, but how much time you need. As also Stephen Webb said, in a project with 20 partners, decide on the metadata, decide on the formats and everything among the partners. And if you have also maybe an idea of how much does it really cost in Austria, the long-term preservation of data? What does FEDRA charge for long-term preservation, for example, of the University of Vienna?
So I will start with the second question. As far as I know, FEDRA offers its services for free to those who are working at the University of Vienna. So if you are a researcher working at the Univien and you contact the FEDRA team in advance, they can secure a space for you, and this shouldn't be a problem. Usually the cost is related to the so-called ingest. So in preparing the data for being suitable for the repository, for making sure that it's in the file format that the repository is willing to accept, to make sure that the license is clear, to make sure that it's following the metadata standards that the repository is supporting. So for example, FEDRA is supporting Dublin Core as a metadata standard, but is not supporting DataSite. So if your data is already with Dublin Core, it's easy, and it's just about putting data in the repository. But if it has to be somehow migrated, changed, then FEDRA team won't do it because this is a cost. They have to hire a developer or a librarian or whoever can do that. Depends, of course, on the project. And this is the cost you have to take into account. And that's why you also need a data management plan. If you know where you will deposit, from the very beginning, you may use the file format or the metadata standard that will be cheaper for you in the end. So this is one of the answers. Second answer is that so far the repositories are run by universities or institutions that have this special mission of keeping everything long and available. So just like CERN is offering Zenodo for free. As long as you have relatively small amounts of data, you can usually get away with it for free if they fit the repository. If you have thinking about big data, and if you're going to bring few terabytes of data, then repositories may say, this doesn't work that way, you have to pay. And this is all based on the project, and it's hard for me to tell how much your project would have to pay for that. And going back to the first question, which was about the responsibility, how much time it takes to implement all these measures. So usually at the beginning of the project, you discuss things like dissemination. So you say we are going to have website, we are going to have versioning system, we're going to have, I know, internal communication every month, and so on. Data management plan is one of these things you should discuss at the beginning of the project, just one more point on the agenda. And again, it depends on your domain. If we're talking about metadata, like you asked, if it's clear in your domain that you're going to use this specific metadata, then people will simply use it. If you don't have one, then it's an additional task for you to find out. This takes time. This is a task you have to take into account in your budget. So actually, when you're preparing your proposal and when you're having a deliverable data management plan, you may think of adding some more effort into this. But I'm sorry, this is impossible to say about the effort without knowing the project and the discipline.
Thank you.
Okay, wir haben in der Zwischenzeit auch einen Hinweis bekommen, dass das Symbol möglicherweise missverständlich ist. Und zwar, wenn der rote Pfeil der Hand nach unten zeigt, dann heißt es, dass die Hand gehoben ist. Also vielleicht, um da auch ein bisschen darauf hinzuweisen. Derzeit, genau, wir haben jetzt noch, ich sehe gerade 3 Hände. Und zwar eine Frage von Frau Brunner-Venusch, bitte.
Hello, thank you. My question is the consortium agreement in a project usually governs in general how to handle results. So usually on fair and reasonable conditions between partners. And would you recommend to consider the data management plan in the consortium agreement?
Is it not part of the Article 29.1?
Yeah, but not of consortium.
Okay, because I don't remember, I can't tell now by heart, but the Article 29.1 says that you have to provide open access to data, and it doesn't state explicitly that you will create a data management plan, but it implies it. But I don't remember exactly this article right now. But if you are participating in Horizon 2020, this is just a recommendation from the Commission, and it has to be officially deliverable. But if you have to put it into the agreement, I don't know. I cannot answer it right now.
Vielleicht kann ich mich kurz einschalten. Also automatisch ist er nicht im Konsortialvertrag und ich glaube, es kommt wirklich darauf an, um welche Daten es sich handelt und inwieweit sie sich auch durch den Konsortialvertrag absichern wollen, dass bestimmter Zugriff auf bestimmte Daten von bestimmten Partnern gewährleistet sind. Es gibt zwar die Bestimmungen, dass jeder Partner natürlich Access geben muss, um den anderen Partnern die Exploration oder Dissemination zu ermöglichen, aber wenn es einen spezifischen Grund gäbe, um sich abzusichern, dann wäre es wahrscheinlich keine blöde Idee, auch den DMP ausdrücklich reinzunehmen als Teil des Konsortialvertrags.
Okay, also auch wenn er eigentlich ein Teil von Grant Agreement, wie ich jetzt gerade gehört habe, also zumindest dorthin verwiesen wird, und das Grant Agreement ist ja eigentlich vorrangig zum Consortium Agreement, wenn Sie sagen, sicherheitshalber einmal darauf verweisen, dass konkret Results auch im DMP.
Ja, nur um den DMP zu duplizieren, nein, aber wenn Sie im Konsortialvertrag dann mehr noch ins Detail gehen und auch zum Beispiel genaue Konsequenzen festlegen, was passiert, wenn ein Partner Ihnen bestimmte Daten nicht gibt und Sie dadurch einen Schaden haben, dann sind wir schon auf einer anderen Detailebene, die man selbstverständlich im Konsortialvertrag regeln kann. Nur um den gleichen DMP zu wiederholen, und da kommt auch auf konkrete Projekte an, können Schäden entstehen durch das nicht zugänglich machen von Daten oder durch das schlechte Aufheben von Daten. Ja, das sind Fragestellungen, die man sich sicher stellen könnte.
Okay, Dankeschön.
Gut, wir haben eine nächste Frage. Frau Dagam, bitte.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for this very informative presentation. My question goes to the repository theme, and you showed some repositories as example, and some of them were not Europeans. And the question goes to, is it a must that EU projects should use European repositories all the time, or are we also allowed to use, for instance, repository 66?
There is no official regulation saying that it must be within the European Union. So everything that is considered trustworthy and a repository that you trust and is a repository, it doesn't have to have any specific certification like the data seal of approval. So if it's a repository and it's somewhere else, it's in the US, it's perfectly fine. There are many repositories, domain specific, that are hosted elsewhere. And if this repository is the best choice for you, it fits best for you, just go for it.
Thank you, that's clear. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, eine Dame hat noch die Hand gehoben. Frau Kein, bitte.
Oh, hello, thank you. My question is, you mentioned that the cost can be claimed for. How is that in ITNs? Because, I mean, of course, ITNs, those are training the scientists of the future, and there's usually no specific provision for that in the ITN budget.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not competent to answer the question. I'm not an expert on this, legal internal things. I'm more in the data management plans. So I provided this information because this is provided in the official guidelines, but it's hard for me to say how it differs for these different types of projects.
Thank you.
So I don't want to mislead you by coming up with something that may be not true.
Okay, wir haben derzeit keine mündlichen Fragen mehr. Es ist eine Frage schriftlich reingekommen, bei der hat es mündlich nicht funktioniert. Die Frage lautet, are the online software tools all for free, such as DMP Online?
Yes, they are available online for free. DMP Online, by the way, is used by other countries. They are customized. DMP Online is also in German. You can find a template from the Univ there, but you can also just guidance made by Univ, but you can also just use the guidance in English from the European Commission and have just the interface in German if you prefer.
Okay, thank you for that. Are there any further questions? Yes, we have. Georg Schinko, bitte.
Hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question would be, we're talking about opting out of DMP or opting in. How would you say it affects the chance of a proposal to be granted if you opt out, but with insufficient reasons? So with reasons which are not deemed sufficient by the EU.
So the general recommendation says it has no impact on your proposal whether you're out or in. So if the general guideline says we are not assessing this, then this shouldn't have any effect on whether the motivation was good or bad.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, wir haben derzeit keine mündlichen Fragen. Ich würde dann das Webinar auch an dieser Stelle beenden. Martin, ist von deiner Seite noch was offen, sonst würde ich den Abschluss dann machen.
Nein, vielen Dank an den Sprecher und für die gute Übersicht über den DMP, und von meiner Seite gibt es nichts mehr. Danke.
Okay, dann werde ich noch kurz anmerken, dass uns Ihr Feedback äußerst wichtig ist. Bitte füllen Sie im Anschluss den kurzen Feedbackbogen aus, damit wir sehen, wie Ihnen das Webinar gefallen hat und was wir verbessern könnten. Und im Namen der FFG bedanke ich mich für Ihre Teilnahme und würde mich freuen, Sie bei einem unserer nächsten Webinare erneut begrüßen zu dürfen. Schönen Nachmittag.